Good evening and welcome. My name is Dr. Christy Barnes. I'm an Associate Professor of Psychology and Faculty Chair of the Southern Campus Council on Diversity and Inclusion. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank those people who have helped to make events like this one possible. Specifically, I would like to thank Mr. Robert Pleasant, Director of Student Services, who has spearheaded diversity programming at the Southern Campus. I would also like to thank the members of the Council for Diversity and Inclusion, Mr. Mike Donnelly, Ms. Shannon Frazee, Mr. Tyler Grubbs, Mr. Ernie Hall, Mr. Tim Mollett, Dr. Teresa McKenzie, Dr. Yihong Xiao Lucas, and Dr. Joy Scheidel. I would also like to thank Dean Debbie Marinsky and Ohio University for supporting programs that celebrate diversity and foster inclusion. Special thanks to Mr. Eric Brown for his technical expertise and support. I have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker, who is a dear friend of mine from college, Mr. Eric Stern, who currently serves as Assistant Dean of the Career Development Office at the University of California School of Law. I can't say enough wonderful things about Eric. He's brilliant, kind, and just super cool. Eric was one of those people who knew in college that he wanted to change the world, and he has, and he continues to do so. He has been gracious enough to share his time with us this evening to tell us his story and the ways in which he has made a positive impact, especially in the LGBTQIA+ community. Without further ado, I'll turn things over to Mr. Eric Stern.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It's so good to see Professor Christy Barnes again, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight. Christy and I were good friends, classmates at Marietta College, so it's really good to be back in community with her. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So growing up in Ohio, I never had the chance to hear from openly gay professionals. And I know that if I had, I would have felt less alone and more connected to my community. So I really want to thank Ohio Southern for creating the space for an event like this. And tonight I want to share with you my story. And as I take you along on that journey, I want to share with you some lessons that I learned along the way. So I grew up in Wadsworth, Ohio, which is a small suburb of Akron and Cleveland. And from a very young age, I knew I was gay. But I hid this difference because I knew that it would be safer in Wadsworth to do so. I didn't know or see any openly gay people in town. And I grew up during a time when there was not widespread acceptance or even tolerance for people who were gay or lesbian. It was not uncommon at that time to hear people say that everyone who was gay was going to die of AIDS. I was a late bloomer. For the first 3 years of high school, I got mediocre grades and didn't think I was going to even go to college. But then my junior year, I got swept up in presidential politics. A charismatic governor from Arkansas named Bill Clinton was running for president. And growing up in one of the most important battleground states presented me with the opportunity to see the candidates up close and personal at events. I quickly fell in love with politics, and it ignited a flame that propelled me to want to learn and excel academically. This also meant I would need to work hard and play lots of catch up in order to pull my GPA up so that I could get into college to pursue a career in public service. I was able to improve my grades during my junior and senior year of high school, but would they be good enough to get me into a four-year college? I'm so grateful that a little liberal arts college on the border of Ohio and West Virginia took a chance on me. And while my admissions offer was conditional, I was so excited when that letter came from Marietta College. At Marietta, I flourished personally and professionally. I wrote for the school's newspaper, was a radio DJ, led college Democrats, joined a fraternity, volunteered for Habitat for Humanity, and competed with the Model UN team. I changed my major 3 times, from marketing to education, finally deciding on political science. I also nearly received a minor in music. I am a singer and a piano player, and if I could do it all over again, I would have majored in music, as it is one of the great loves of my life. I feel lucky that I've been able to pursue music, and in December of 2018, I sang my first solo. In the summer after my junior year of college, I decided to do an internship in Washington, D.C. I was lucky enough that one of my professors has some friends in DC who had a basement apartment where they would let me live in the summer for free. And those friends also happened to be civil rights lawyers, one of whom actually worked in the White House counsel's office for President Jimmy Carter. There was no way I would have ever been able to meet them if it had not been for that professor. I was fortunate enough that summer to work with an incredible group of advocates and community organizers at a nonprofit called Project Vote. Project Vote's mission is to build an electorate that accurately represents the diversity of this nation and to ensure that every eligible citizen can register, vote, and cast a ballot that counts. That summer, the Project Vote team jumped into vans and we drove from Washington, D.C. to Missouri to help support efforts on the ground to collect signatures for a statewide ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage. Project Vote worked closely with labor unions, and I learned about the power of coalition work and the need to jump in and participate in movements designed to address social and economic injustice no matter where they might be. I also learned that if you have the ability to advocate for those without a voice, those in this case were too busy to advocate for themselves because they were working 2 jobs and raising a family, that you should get in there and help however you can. When the Project Vote vans arrived in Missouri, each of us was dropped off in Walmart parking lots across the state, where we were asked to collect signatures in an effort to make sure that the initiative qualified for that fall's ballot. This required a lot of difficult conversations with local voters, many of whom were opposed to raising the minimum wage. It was a transformative experience for me as a 20-year-old, and I vowed to return to Washington, D.C. after graduating from college. After having an amazing experience with Project Vote, I was determined to get back to DC and secure a paid job with a terrific nonprofit organization. But with very little experience and having graduated from a college that many in DC had never heard of, the only offers I received were for unpaid positions. With bills to pay, I began my search anew. Knowing that law school might be in my future and that DC was full of lawyers and law firms, I started applying for paralegal and legal assistant positions. I landed a wonderful job at a law firm called Slevin and Hart. All of their clients were labor unions and they specialized in employee benefits law. The attorneys were progressive and they were proud to be supporting the labor movement. My 2 years at the firm gave me so much: my first professional mentors and a tip that would lead me to the law school of my dreams. I never intended on living or practicing in Boston. In fact, my first time in Boston was when I started law school. But when I learned about Northeastern and its unique program, I was sold. Northeastern has a proud history of political activism and of having lots of its graduates go directly into social justice work. It also has a system where first students do the traditional first year law curriculum and then do a series of 4 legal internships called co-ops every other time you graduate. You have a year of legal experience. As a hands-on learner who loves learning outside of the classroom, I knew this was the place for me. When I arrived at Northeastern's orientation for first year students, there were rainbow colored signs everywhere proclaiming that Northeastern was the queerest law school in the nation. Finally, I felt comfortable enough at 23 to come fully out as a gay man. Having mentored and coached many LGBTQ students and young professionals, there is one thing that I believe is still true 22 years after I came out. Whether you are coming out or just fully embracing the parts of your identity that you know are different, don't let others dictate your timeline. It is up to you, and you should do all of this on your own terms. At Northeastern, I was able to explore so many different areas of the law that I was curious and passionate about. Some of the best experiences I had were in the 3 legal clinics I participated in, which focused on supporting victims of domestic violence, helping poor clients secure public benefits, and writing appeals to try to save those who had been sentenced to death. Knowing that I wanted to return to DC as a lawyer after graduation, for 2 years during my second and third year, I shuffled back and forth between Boston and DC to do 4 legal internships. At the Whitman Walker Clinic, I had the chance to provide legal advice and counsel to people living with HIV and AIDS who had been the victims of discrimination in employment, housing, and medical benefits. At the Children's Law Center, I helped attorneys who were representing children in abuse and neglect cases. And I was also able to provide support to kids with special needs who were being denied the services they needed from the schools they were attending. As an intern in the US Department of Justice, I worked with attorneys in the Civil Rights Division. I was working at the DOJ on 9/11, and it was a day that I'll never forget. When we went back to work, I had the chance to work on a case in which the Newark Police Department was forcing Muslim police officers to shave their beards, which the officers claimed violated their religious civil rights. The DOJ entered into a consent decree, which allowed the officers to keep their beards. Finally, for my 4th legal internship, I was faced with a difficult decision. I had offers from a law firm that specialized in civil rights, as well as the Human Rights Campaign, a national LGBTQ advocacy organization. I knew that this was probably my last chance to take a position that might lead to a traditional attorney job at a law firm, but I also knew that my heart was in politics and policy. So I took the job with HRC and I never looked back. As I navigated different professional spaces in DC, I noticed that my lack of educational pedigree was going to be a challenge. Many folks in DC thought Marietta was in Georgia and that Northeastern was a highly ranked law school located in Chicago. I was lucky enough to have received some really good advice early on in my law school career. A mentor told me that I would need to work really hard to build a team of advocates, and that one way to do that was to invest in relationships, particularly with those supervisors and others who seemed to be taking an active interest in my development as a professional. It would be that team of advocates who knew me best that would be able to advocate for me most effectively when writing recommendation letters and serving as professional references. One way to get a public interest job right out of law school is through fellowships, which are typically entry level positions with nonprofit organizations. I received sponsorship from the Whitman Walker Clinic for a fellowship, and I reached the finalist stage for what's called a Skadden Fellowship, which is a 2-year paid fellowship with loan repayment. So it's a very sweet public interest job. I found out on a cold winter day in Boston that I didn't get it, and I was heartbroken. And I needed to pick myself back up and figure out how I was going to get a job after law school in DC, which is where I knew I wanted to be. So I traveled to the Equal Justice Works conference and career fair, where I interviewed for a number of different positions. One of those interviews was with the Alliance for Justice. The Alliance for Justice offered me a 1-year fellowship to work on their judicial selection project and gave me my start as a new attorney. AFJ did a lot of coalition work, and it presented me with the opportunity to meet folks working at many national nonprofit organizations on issues that I deeply cared about. It was this network and my team of advocates who helped me land my dream job. In 2003, the DNC appointed me to serve as the director of LGBT outreach. I was responsible for putting together strategies and plans to mobilize, energize, and turn out LGBT voters for Democratic candidates. While not part of the job description, I also saw this as a position. I also saw this position as an opportunity to advance the rights of LGBTQ Americans within the Democratic Party. Well, it seems like we are only now seeing more visibility and acceptance of transgender Americans in the media and in politics. With openly trans elected officials and the first ever trans cabinet level appointee, we've definitely seen progress. But when I was working at the DNC, it was a very different situation. Transgender activists have been a part of the Democratic Party for a long time, but there are many in the party who are opposed to recognizing their contributions at the state and local level. In 2004, we had the opportunity to push for more trans representation among the party's elected delegates to the Democratic National Convention. As a result of the brave and sophisticated organizing strategies of the transgender community, we saw a record 6 openly transgender delegates at the 2004 DNC convention. After shattering this glass ceiling, we have now seen openly trans elected officials, party leaders, cabinet members, and openly trans staff at the DNC and in the White House. As a cisgender white male, I recognized as the director of LGBT outreach that I had some level of power at the DNC and that I could use that power to support transgender activists in their quest to achieve the respect and recognition that they deserved within the Democratic Party. I quickly learned that this would not make me popular and that it might even harm my future career advancement within the party. But I also knew that it was the right thing to do. This is a lesson that helped to shape my moral and ethical values and how I conduct myself, given all the privilege and power that I have as a cisgender white male. The DNC provided me with the opportunities of a lifetime, working at the Iowa caucuses, staffing the 2004 DNC convention, getting to meet political heroes and celebrities like Ben Affleck, and seeing an inspiring speech from a young senator from Illinois. I got to work on my first presidential campaign for John Kerry and John Edwards, and I was sent to Iowa, where I served as a regional field director. And I was asked to manage a team. And this was one of my very first experiences as manager, and I learned so much. I learned that it's really important in that role that I defer to the judgment of the local organizers who I believe should be out front with me behind the scenes. I learned that these lessons are super important. Instead of, I actually, sort of recognize this now in my work now. I come into contact with a lot of judges in my work at every level, from the U.S. Supreme Court to state Supreme Court justices. And instead of trying to get a lot of face time with the judges, I'm intentional about making sure that our students get a lot of face time with the judges, which offers them the opportunity to have candid, intimate conversations with leaders who are at the very top of our profession. Instead of me moderating panels with judges, I often invite students to serve as moderators of those panels. And then I provide them with coaching, questions, and support so they feel confident when taking on this role. While we gave it our best shot in 2004, there was no President Kerry. We came up short, and I left Iowa and packed my bags and flew back to home to DC. Howard Dean, who some of you may recognize as the former governor of Vermont, a former presidential candidate, he was coming into the DNC as the new chair, and there were opportunities to work for him. But I had the unique opportunity to be the executive director for a small national nonprofit organization, National Stonewall Democrats. I learned so much about myself and ultimately what was most important to me during that time about work life balance. And about 2 years into the job, I realized that it was not the right role for me. I knew when it was time to walk away and figured out a way to do it professionally and with grace. This is often a scary thing to do, but if you are finding yourself suffering from persistent stress and it is manifesting itself physically and having an effect on your personal relationships and your mental health, it is never worth it to stay at a job for fear that you will not be able to find something else. You can come up with an exit strategy that allows you to save time and money in case you are unemployed for some period. But you always have to put yourself and your mental health and your wellness first. So I had to figure out what to do next. And I actually went and talked to my career counselor at my law school. And she encouraged me to do a lot of informational interviewing, which is something I would highly recommend for anyone who's thinking about making a career transition. I was lucky to land a job at George Washington Law School. And even though I was humbled by being the newest entry level hire after being the executive director at the DNC and at Stonewall, I was so grateful to GW for giving me the chance to break into higher education administration. And then, just as I was leaning into my new career, politics came calling again. A friend that I knew from the labor and LGBT community asked me if I was interested in helping with some community organizing work on the John Edwards for President campaign. And what started out as some initial basic volunteering turned into about a year of very involved work, including serving as the co chair of the LGBT steering committee for the campaign and traveling to Iowa, back to Iowa, where politics is front and center, to talk to gay voters about John Edwards. And I traveled to 3 different cities in Iowa to do that outreach work. It was fun, it was exciting, and I enjoyed it immensely. And then, after about a year at GW, personal circumstances led to a big change. I had always wanted to live in the Bay Area in California, San Francisco, and finally the opportunity presented itself. And I was so fortunate to land a position at Berkeley Law, which has just been the perfect fit for me these last 15 years. Berkeley is a public law school with a focus on service. And I find that I have shared values with many of my colleagues. Many of the students here are the sons and daughters of migrant workers. Many of them are the first in their families to graduate from college. I'm so inspired by the students that I get to support. And after all these years, I still find so much joy and inspiration in my work. On the political front, after moving to California, I continued my work with the Edwards campaign until he dropped out. A few days later, I received calls from some friends who were working on the Clinton and Obama campaigns. So while I had signed on with Senator Edwards in early 2007, I had never forgotten seeing Obama speak at the 2004 DNC convention. And I really admired the way in which he was running his presidential campaign. So when the chair of Obama's LGBT policy committee called me to ask me to join the campaign, I said yes. I was able to immediately bring a bunch of the LGBT supporters of John Edwards over to the Obama campaign. And I have to tell you that I loved every minute of working on that campaign. It was the best political experience of my entire life. And I had lots of support from Chris Edley, who at the time was the dean at Berkeley Law. Turns out that Dean Edley was Obama's law professor at Harvard and one of his closest confidants. As my work with the campaign escalated, I was faced with the most difficult decision of my career. The Obama campaign offered me a full-time job in Chicago. I had just moved to California and I'd just taken a job at my dream school. My heart was saying yes, but my head was saying no. I knew that Chicago would lead me back to DC, and I was ready to see what it would feel like to put down some roots in California. After making that very difficult decision, I stayed on with the Obama campaign and I helped them design and place ads in local newspapers and battleground states to try to generate more support for Obama in the LGBTQ community. I also helped the campaign with get out the vote strategies in the Ohio and Texas primaries. I was having so much fun, and it looked like Obama had a chance of winning the nomination. Well, he not only won the party's nomination, but on November 4th, 2008, he was elected president. And whenever I need to feel inspired, I watch the video of the Obama family coming to the stage in Chicago's Grant Park, and I listen to the deafening sounds of celebration. And I watch the joy and the tears streaming down the faces of so many people in the crowd. The week after he was elected president, Obama's staff reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in helping with the transition. The Gay and Lesbian the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund put together the Presidential Appointments Project to increase LGBT representation in the White House as well as in federal agencies. And we achieved historical results and helped to pave the way for shattering another glass ceiling when Pete Buttigieg was confirmed by the Senate to serve as the first openly LGBT cabinet member in the Biden administration. In June 2009, I returned back to DC for a very special occasion, the first ever LGBT Pride reception at the White House. I was so humbled to be in the room with so many folks who had worked so hard to help make the country a better and safer place for LGBT Americans. Okay, so I may have grown up in Ohio, but I work at Berkeley and I live in California. So this is the part of the presentation where I get a little new agey and a little hippie with some words of wisdom. So, in terms of uncertainty and chaos, focus on what you can control. Be strategic about building your professional network. The well of generosity is so deep right now. People want to help and they want to support you. And almost no one likes networking, but we all need to get over it if we want to reach our career goals, whether they're personal or professional. And if you're intentional about building your network, they will come through for you again and again in good times and bad times. My network has come through for me each step of the way, and I feel grateful that I now get to help students build and expand their networks and to think about how to utilize those networks to achieve their career goals. Invest in personal relationships that bring you joy, lift you up, and help you feel like the best possible version of yourself. Surround yourself with people who love you for exactly who you are, flaws and all. And while it may be painful, let go of those who don't see you and who don't love you. Remember that we are responsible for our own self care. I have yet to work for a boss who has told me to work less. It's up to us to set boundaries and engage in the self care and stress reduction efforts we need to stay balanced and healthy. And while we are responsible for this part of our lives, we are not alone in this endeavor. Again, we must surround ourselves with compassionate and caring folks and hold each other accountable when it comes to self care. And don't be shy about asking all of us elder folks what we do to keep our lives in balance. We want to help, and we're here to share experiences with you. Lastly, believe in yourself and trust your instincts. You are smart, you are capable, you are competent, and you know what you need to be happy. Thanks so much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions if we still have some time left.
Eric, this was just completely engaging and inspiring. And I mean, I love the mental health plugs that you had it throughout your presentation. So I was sitting there like silently cheering many, many times throughout your presentation, and I feel like we've caught up. Everything that you have done in the last several years, it was like having a conversation with you back at Marietta. I mean, just completely engaged and listening to every word of what you were saying, wondering what you were going to say next about all of the wonderful things you've been up to. Um, and so I don't want to, monopolize the time here, but I would like to ask you, I apologize, it is a kind of maybe difficult question I would guess for you to answer, but given everything that you have experienced, is there any one thing that you really found so completely meaningful that it placed you on the trajectory that you're at, right where you are right now? Any one event, political, professional, that you would want to share that influenced you that in that particular way?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think there were several. I think about some of the educators in my life, honestly, who encouraged me to believe in myself, to take risks, to stay the course on my path, despite there being people who told me that I couldn't achieve what I wanted to. I definitely have also had some professional supervisors, particularly in the political space, who whispered in my ear and told me that I could do anything. And I think when somebody, particularly at the top of your profession, who is stingy with praise, says something like that to you, it just means so much. And I still think about that. There was a supervisor I had at the DNC who who is one of the most famous political strategists um, in the Democratic Party, and particularly somebody who has lifted up the role of so many women who were told they couldn't be political strategists. She has shattered that ceiling and has created a pathway for so many women to run campaigns, to be the White House press secretary, to be the chief of staff, to be the vice president, right? I mean, just all these things that we see now. And I learned so much from her about what it means to be a manager, what it means to lead a team, and what it means to try to create opportunities for people who might be too shy to ask for advice. I learned so much from her, and to this day, I hear her voice when I'm going through something difficult, and I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, it's lonely at the top. I know, I know what you meant when you said that to me, Teresa. But yeah, I'm so grateful that I had the chance to work for her, and so grateful that I had educators who were so encouraging and who saw potential in me and encouraged me to follow it.
We have a question in the chat. What advice would you give to younger LGBTQIA plus students who find themselves in a small town with limited means to, for lack of a better word, escape the narrow mindedness that often lies beneath the surface of a rural area?
It's a great it's a great question, and you know, I have been I've had a lot of privilege in that since I have been 21, I have lived in Washington D.C., Boston, and San Francisco, all of which have large LGBTQ communities, and all of which are places that I have felt comfortable walking down the street, holding my husband's hand, um, where I've felt the power of the community. But LGBTQ people live everywhere And that was me growing up, living in a small town in Ohio and feeling like I was the only one, and feeling like I was alone and that it would be dangerous for me to show that part of my identity. And I know those feelings are difficult and demoralizing and challenging. And I remain hopeful that things will continue getting better for all of us everywhere. Um, I think it's hard sometimes to think about staying in a place where you don't feel like you can be yourself for the rest of your life. Um, but I think um, what gives me hope is that there are allies out there that may not necessarily be a part of the community, but are there to provide care and support and compassion. And there are so many more allies than there used to be. And I think it's I consider myself an ally to the trans community, to the gender non-binary community, and I think we as allies need to make ourselves more visible so that people don't feel alone, so that they feel like they've got somebody by their side who they can talk to, they can confide in. And so I'm hopeful that those allies will surface for the person who asked the question. Um, and it's not up to queer people necessarily to always try to have to find those allies. We need to make ourselves more visible. Thanks for that
Eric, I have a
question.
question. What coming from a small community similar to Ironton, I'm thinking, what were some of the skills, characteristics? What were some of the lessons that you learned from coming from a community that size that help you, um, that's helping you today or help you throughout your life to this point?
Absolutely. I think um, politically, where I grew up, it was pretty conservative, and I think, uh, but it was a great community. Wadsworth was a great community. There was a lot of really good things about it, and um, I think one of the things that I really learned is how important it is not to immediately rush to judgment about somebody because they might be a member of a different political party than you, or they might go to a different church than you, or they might not go to church at all, or any difference, right? And particularly now where the country is so polarized and so divided, at least it feels that way. I think those are values that I really still try to incorporate into my life, to try to bridge differences, to try to meet people where they are, to try to find common ground. And I think sometimes I have friends who grew up in places that are just extremely homogenous politically, that frankly are unwilling to do that. And I think it's in part what has led to a lot of the division in our country, among other things. So I feel grateful that I still try to bring those values in because I have a lot of wonderful people in my life, from Wadsworth who I don't see eye to eye with politically, but that I can talk to, and have dialogue with to try to understand um, where we might have disagreements, or maybe just not to talk about them and instead to talk about the Browns or the Buckeyes or the Cavs. So the Steelers, depending upon what part of Ohio you're in.
So I have a question. When are you running for office? All this experience come.
Oh, it's interesting. I feel like the current role I'm in feels very high profile, and it's interesting. I didn't say this during my talk, but I feel like this is one of the first times I felt in my job where so many of the skills I learned in politics I am now using just in terms of communications and diplomacy, and again trying to bridge those differences. We have a very activist oriented student body, and they're also lawyers in training, so they're very passionate, and they are developing the skills that are ultimately going to make them very persuasive as lawyers. So they're already bringing those arguments, to our office, to the dean, and yeah, I feel like I'm utilizing a lot of my political skills again now, 15 years later.
Thank you.
Well, I guess my question is kind of you kind of already touched it when you answered Robert's question. Just I from you had a lot of experience dealing with all kinds of different people, and I think one thing about living in the United States is there's so many different views, opinions about everything, politics, or even whether we should wear a mask or not, getting a vaccine. So I don't know in your have you ever experienced any like conflicts with anybody? Or I know you said maybe, maybe try, I don't know, try to avoid avoid talking about it with, people different from having different views. Um, I guess a lot of times we just don't really quite understand each other, because especially about the pandemic thing. I have a lot of friends living in China, and they have completely different views from what we have here, and I don't know. So maybe the best thing to do is to just avoid the topic, otherwise, get into like really, awkward, uncomfortable situations. So I was just curious, like if you have experienced a lot of conflicts like this, different views, opinions, in politics or in life, whatever. So how do you deal with that? And if you have any experience, so.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm working on personally is trying to be less judgmental, and trying to understand when I do encounter someone who has a very different opinion on an issue that's of great importance to me, taking a step back and asking maybe why, and trying to find compassion, for that person, and maybe what has brought them to hold that belief, or have that perspective. It's a practice. It's not perfect. I still find myself um, being judgmental. I still find myself dismissing somebody, so it's a natural instinct, and it's something that I'm working on. Um, I also, just on a, with regard to the LGBTQ community, I also feel like, one of the things I touched upon in my remarks was, sometimes how there are political activists in the community who believe that everybody should be out, in every space, and that they can't understand why people come out later in life. They can't understand why somebody, doesn't have a picture of their partner on their desk. And that's always been something that has been a little bit of a trigger for me, because again, I believe it's everybody's own personal journey, and that they can decide when they want to reveal those parts of their identity. Yes, it can be political. Yes, we have to stand up and be counted. It's how we amass, power. It's how we're visible. But at what expense? Not everybody has a welcoming family. Not everybody lives in a welcoming place. So that has been something where I felt like, what, I'm going to speak up and speak my mind on this, because I think they're missing a perspective on that. And obviously that's personal to me as well, since I came out a little bit later than the average person does now. I think the other thing that I noticed that was a conflict for me, that if I could go back, I would do it differently, was when I was deployed to Iowa. by the Carrie Edwards campaign to work there, I went to Des Moines, which was the headquarters for the Iowa Carrie Edwards campaign, and I met with this guy who I knew was a openly gay political strategist from the West Coast, and he knew that I was the director of LGBT outreach at the DNC, so obviously a high-profile gay political position. And he basically told me, "You're in Iowa now, and keep the gay stuff quiet." So here was a gay man telling another gay man to keep the gay stuff quiet. Here was a gay man from a very blue part of the West Coast telling another gay man who grew up in a red part of the Midwest to turn down, his identity. And I was a lot younger and a lot less confident than I am now. And I was really disappointed in my community. This was a gay, sort of a high profile gay kind of elder in the political movement. It made me feel shame. It made me feel disappointed. And it made me feel like he didn't trust me. It's a lot of bad feelings. And it also lit a fire underneath me. So I went into Davenport, which is in one of the Quad Cities in Iowa, and I said, "I'm going to win this county, and I'm going to do it my way." And we did. But I thought, if I ever run into him again, this version of Eric is going to tell him a thing or two. So, but I look out for things like that. It's like, there's no space in the community for people to be shaming one another like that. It's just so unproductive. It's toxic. It's just not something that I think I have tolerance for anymore. So. It's a great question.
Thank you. Great answer.
Well, I think I could probably ask you questions all evening, but I'm just so grateful for the time that you've shared with us this evening and for sharing your story with us. And I know you and Josh have an event to go to here shortly, so I want to be mindful of our time. So I just want to take one last opportunity to ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Eric. Okay, well, then I am going to hope that you and I can continue to have conversations like this moving forward, because I've just found you to be completely inspiring and sharing your stories and your experiences and with the work that you do. I can't thank you enough again for your time this evening, for everything that you do to make this world a better place. And just thank you so much, Eric. And I want to thank Robert and again, the Diversity Committee, all of you for being here this evening and participating in this event. For those of you who will be watching the recorded event, thank you again for all that you do to promote diversity and inclusion in our community and the world around us. And Eric Brown, I can't thank you enough for everything that you do on the technical end of things to make things like this happen, because there's no way. I mean, I was happy that I got a new background up tonight. So thank you so much for everything that you do as well. Thank you all for being here. And Eric Stern, thank you again so very much.
It's been my pleasure. I've so enjoyed being in conversation with you all. And thanks for all that you do, for your campus community as well. And just been really fun. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing pictures later of tonight's event.
You can count on it.
All right, great. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Bye-bye.